According to a recent opinion poll, many Muslims say that the way for the West to have better relations with Islam is to show it more respect. And who said Muslims don't have a sense of humour? Given that Islam is officially above criticism in the West, it's hard to imagine how we could give it any more respect short of closing down all the pubs, growing beards and beating up women who don't want to dress like nuns. Ah, yes, of course. Silly me. I think many people in the West are now realising that Islam has already been given far too much respect, especially here in Europe, where, according to another poll, people now see it as a threat to their culture. They carry on accommodating its every demand, of course, but this is not because Islam is welcome in Europe, far from it. It's because people have been conditioned by the lie of multiculturalism to believe that what they should think is more important than what they do think. So, although people will criticise Islam in private, they know that to do so publicly, in other words, to be honest about their feelings, would instantly make them racists and Islamophobes and Nazis and disgusting imperialist, ethnocentric, fascist bastards grinding their jackboots into the faces of the innocent and the weak. So, best not make a fuss. You want to beat your wife and mutilate your daughter? Be our guest. We'll even subsidise it, because we want to be your friend. What's that? You want to destroy our corrupt society? Well, that's our fault, not yours. Here, have some more money. This film that's coming out in Holland shortly, which has got the whole country in a state of heightened terrorist alert, is yet more proof that everything in Europe now needs to be measured against the possibility of Muslim violence. Every play, every film, every art exhibition, every magazine article, in fact, our whole culture is now subject to Muslim approval. But then this is Europe, and we have a history of appeasement and caving into threats. Radical Islam knows this and is playing us like a violin. They know that Islam will never get blamed for anything in Europe, no matter what happens. So that, for example, when the Danish press reprinted the cartoons recently, which was followed by a week of rioting by Muslim youths, Copenhagen's chief of police refused to admit that it had anything to do with the cartoons. He said it was because they were bored. Yes, that's right. They all rushed out and set fire to the city every night for a week for something to do. If only they'd had a table tennis club. The whole thing happened because 3 Islamic fanatics were caught planning to murder the cartoonist. Imagine how bored they must have been. Oh yes, also, a newsflash for European journalists. An anti-Semitic attack by Muslims on Jews is not a conflict between communities. In case you hadn't noticed, Islam hates Jews. Even if Israel didn't exist, Islam would still hate Jews. Their holy book tells Muslims that they should hate Jews. So I think you'll find what's happening is not a conflict between communities at all, but a violent, unprovoked, racist attack by Muslims on Jews because they're Jews. Just thought I'd clear that one up for you so that you can report it accurately next time, if you bother to report it at all. If we were serious about respecting Islam, we would give it an honest reality check. Islam needs to adapt to Europe, not the other way around. Now, I know a lot of Muslims actually agree with this, and they make an effort to adapt and to rub along with everybody else, which is great, and it's very welcome. But we all know that a lot of others don't, which is why many European cities have large Muslim ghettos controlled by religious bigots, where indigenous laws and values are increasingly unwelcome. Places full of people who have no intention of integrating and who want nothing less than the end of our civilization while we pander and defer to them, thanks to a biased press, a complacent judiciary and the kind of politicians you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Actually, you probably would. And this situation is as much a threat to the freedom of ordinary Muslims as it is to everybody else. And it's a clear indication that what we need in Europe now is not more respect for Islam, it's less respect for Islam and more respect for ourselves. We need to stop pretending, because that's what we're doing, pretending that all cultures are equal, when we can clearly see that they're not. Islamic culture is not equal to Western culture. It encourages violence against women, against Jews and homosexuals. It sanctions polygamy and marrying old men to young children in a disgusting travesty of human relations. Anyone in the West advocating these kinds of values would very quickly find themselves in jail. It's not equal, it's inferior. And given radical Islam's openness about its totalitarian agenda, this is not something that should be encouraged in any way. It should be discouraged by firm legislation and by rigorous enforcement of the law. Remember the law? Now, I know that I'm going to be accused of racism and Islamophobia by the usual self-righteous pinheads, but I don't mind because those words have no value in this context. One has been neutralised by repeated dishonest misuse, and the other is just a barefaced lie concocted by the political left in tandem with the religious right in a marriage of convenience which is, well, quite simply beneath contempt. A phobia is an irrational fear. Resisting Islam is not irrational. Pandering to it is irrational. Indulging the lie that Islamic culture is somehow equal to Western culture while ignoring the victims of that culture is more than irrational, it's downright criminal. And if you really want to talk about racism, then look no further than the poisonous fiction of multiculturalism, a divisive and patronising racist ideology. And the governments of Europe who promote it are racist governments. The civil servants who pander to it are racists. The university lecturers who encourage it are racists. The journalists who lie about it are racists. And the ordinary people who say one thing in private and another in public are cowardly, racist hypocrites. If we can't bring ourselves to say what's in our hearts when it truly matters, then we've already given up our freedom, and with it the freedom of future generations, which is something that we've got no right to do. We didn't earn this freedom. It was handed to us on a plate by people who did earn it with their lives. We don't own it. We're custodians of it. It's not ours to give away. So it's time to speak up, Europe. It's time to stop whining and bellyaching about the Americans for 5 minutes and show a little backbone for once. Just once. Or do we want to spend the rest of our lives cowering like frightened mice from a handful of violent bigots who think they have a right to poke a finger into our chest and tell us how we're allowed to live, what we can and can't do, say and think? Well, I don't know about you, but anyone who asks me that question is going to get a very short answer. And I'll give you a clue, it won't contain the words Allah or Akbar. Peace. Wouldn't that be nice?